My name is Jeff Morgan. I'm from Dallas, Texas. Just got back from Rockwall, Texas, in which I got to speak a couple of times, very brief couple of minutes, in front of the Rockwall Courthouses in Rockwall, Texas. And this was a very personal thing to me because I know from my own experience, based in Rockwall, Texas, that there are courts there and judges that completely disregard the Constitution. Now, they may acknowledge the Constitution and their duties in public, but when it comes to the courtroom, they will completely deny that they have any effect. So for instance, at the new courthouse in Rockwall County, I got to speak for a few moments on the one person that I know for a fact, in justice of the peace, Jack James, in justice of the peace, or justice of the peace to most people, but in justice of the peace to me and to those who are familiar with my case, in justice of the peace, Jack James, Precinct One, Rockwall, Texas, will, I'm sure, be being sworn in again, I think, in January, because I believe he just won his re-election. But he was a judge that I appeared in front of, and when I appeared in front of him, I was actually the plaintiff, not the defendant. I had a case that I brought before a small claims court that Judge Jack James was in charge of, in which I was seeking recompense for costs that I had to bear because my ex-wife committed perjury at a court in Dallas, Texas. I had the official transcript, certified transcript, by a certified state transcriber, and in justice of the peace, Jack James stated at the very beginning he was not going to look at any evidence. He then proceeded to try to say that the case was merely a he said versus she said sort of argument, to which I replied, no, Your Honor, this is a she said versus she said type of argument, and here is a court certified transcript. Now, I don't know what else I could offer as evidence, a court certified transcript from a court-certified transcriber, that to me would have been evidence, and it accurately conveyed the proceedings that took place that day. However, in justice of the peace, Jack James decided he was not going to waste his weekend looking at the transcript, whereupon I offered him 18 pages, pages 23 through 41, that he could read instead of the whole 200 and some pages. In justice of the peace, Jack James would not even look at those things. So in other words, in justice of the peace, Jack James, this great judge who's going to be sworn in again, I believe, in January. I'm sure he won his election. He completely suppressed evidence. He deprived me of any type of due process. He took sides with the defendant without even hearing the case, because he would not allow the case to be presented. It was interesting because in justice of the peace, Jack James, after he was done interrogating me, and to say that he was like a prosecuting attorney would be an understatement in my opinion. He went after me on several different occasions. I stood my ground. I kept on thinking he was going to dismiss the case at any time, but I had answers, and they were legitimate answers. And every time Jack James, Injustice Jack James, tried to throw another curveball at me, it was able to be effectively hit. So Injustice of the Peace, Jack James found himself out of ammunition as far as to use against me, and he ended his persecution's trial of me by stating, I have beaten you up enough. I have beaten you up enough. So he was done beating me up. The judge, in justice of the peace, Jack James, I did not know that it was his position to beat up a plaintiff who came to his court seeking remedy for a cause, but he already did not want to hear any evidence, and he, at that point, as I said, said that he beat me up enough, Jack James, and then he turned to my ex-wife, to who maintained that he had no jurisdiction over the issue. The interesting thing was Jack James' clerk actually knew he had jurisdiction, because I spoke with her ahead of time, and she said, yes, he does have jurisdiction, and you filed timely. There should be no issue with this, and she took everything. But Jack James somehow did not know whether he had jurisdiction or not. So when he asked my ex-wife about the jurisdiction, he therefore said, well, do you have a statute to back up your claim that I have no jurisdiction? To which my ex-wife said, no, I'm sorry, Your Honor, I don't. And she didn't, because it doesn't exist. It was the right court, within a proper time frame, and in justice of the peace, Jack James, somehow, who had already tried, by the way, over the previous year, about 130 cases. He had heard 130 cases, and I wonder if in every one of those cases he had to question whether he had jurisdiction or whether he just knew it. But somehow, in my case, he did not know that he had jurisdiction. And to Justice Jack James, he accepted that. Oh, that must be good enough. Now, in justice of the peace, Jack James, therefore, he said that he would go back to his chambers and he would look at things over the weekend and respond back. I believe it was going to be on Monday. regarding his decision. So I actually emailed him the first thing Monday morning about, I was glad that he had heard me out and that basically it was the right jurisdiction and everything else. I think that was the contents of my email. Little did I know that in Justice of the Peace Jack James had lied to me when in the court. He was going to look at it over the weekend, but instead on that Friday, the same day, he went back to his office and he wrote his dismissal with prejudice. So in Justice of the Peace Jack James unilaterally chose to suppress all evidence, chose to not look at court transcripts, chose to believe the side of a person who said you had no jurisdiction, even though he did. He was a disgrace as a judge. He was an absolute disgrace as a judge. And by the way, I probably consider myself a little bit, I voted for Judge Jack James at one time because I was still in Rockwall at that time. I expected a little bit more out of Justice of the Peace Jack James. He was the Republican nominee, and being as I was a very conservative member of the Rockwall GOP, I voted for Justice of the Peace Jack James. And Justice of the Peace Jack James, I'm sure, maintains good membership and good standing within the GOP. I would say this to the GOP of Rockwall: if this is the type of a judge you are admiring, not admonishing, there's something wrong with you too. Justice of the Peace Jack James categorically denied me any type of due process, refused to look at evidence. These are his own words. Stated that he had beaten me up enough. I did not know that it was a judge's job to beat up a plaintiff who was actually going to his court to try to seek remedy. But evidently, this is the type of judge that Justice of the Peace Jack James is. So anyway, I was very happy to continue on with my a few brief minutes of talking about Justice of the Peace Jack James, and I would also like to address this to Representative Justin Holland, and Justin Holland, who represents Rockwall. You know who I am. You've met me. We've talked before. And Senator Bob Hall. Senator Bob Hall, I think, is an outstanding senator. Senator Hall, I'd like you to know that this is Justice of the Peace Jack James. It takes place in Rockwall County. There are many other judges that I know there. There are people that are throughout in politics in many places in Rockwall. In 2012, I actually worked on the Texas GOP platform. So I was known at that point in time. I was also working for the Rick Santorum campaign in 2012 as a volunteer. Everybody knew that I was a leader not just locally, but in the state of Texas, and considered part of the national grassroots team. I looked for a politician that I could trust, that would be honest, that knew about family issues, and I was very actively involved in the Santorum campaign. I assumed incorrectly, and this is where you might say, well, Jeff, you should never assume anything. And I would say, yes, you're right. I should never have assumed anything. That somebody like Justice of the Peace Jack James actually would care about court issues. He appears not to. But, Justice Jack James, I want your name to be very well known. I hope everybody in Rockwall sees this so that they can know that you are the type of person. Oh, by the way, I did file a complaint against him with the Texas State Commission on Judicial Conduct. And the State Commission on Judicial Conduct basically said they had no jurisdiction over Jack James. He can determine whatever he wants to in his courtroom, even if it means suppression of evidence, even if it means deprivation of due process, even if it means whatever it means. Jack James is a god, a demigod in his own courtroom. He does not need to follow the law, so he thinks. Now, the interesting thing is that under the U.S. Code, I think it's Section 18, Title 242, that deprivation of rights under the color of law is actually a federal offense. And Justice of the Peace Jack James needs to know that. I have spoken with others here. I don't know that I'm going to be able to do anything about it. But just to show you, once again, Justice of the Peace Jack James, wonderful man, godly man. He was a fire chief. He was a man of the people, man of the church, in fact, too. And yet he willingly and intentionally suppresses evidence, deprives a person of due process, takes a side, and beats up a plaintiff. That is the type of man he is. Anyway, I was very glad to join Amy Hedke in her tour of the courts throughout the state of Texas, and she gave me the permission to speak for a few minutes on that topic. Thank you, Amy, and thank you for everybody else. Again, in justice of the peace, Jack James. I don't know what else to say about him. He's not a man that I would trust. And feel free to use this video against him, to talk about him. I stand behind everything I say, and I have more that I could. Thank you very much. Bye.